the American Sustainable Business Council.
Great. And Sean, you'll get the screen up and running now for us?
Should be good to go.
Excellent. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. This is David Levine, the CEO of the American Sustainable Business Council. And on behalf of ASBC and CLASP, we're thrilled to be able to open up this dialogue. It's one that we've been holding in some smaller circles before, and thought that it made sense to share it with a larger network of organizations out there as we explore, what we've been calling within the context of the American Sustainable Business Council, sort of the idea of the good business equals good workplace. And today, what we were going to try and cover is the whole frame around business certifications and how, as a tool, it might be effective for our work together around paid sick leave, but also, obviously, as it relates to family medical leave, as it relates to other good workplace practices and the like. So next slide, Sean. So just a quick background here, just so that you have a sense of how to best work with us at the American Sustainable Business Council. If you're not quite clear of that, what you see on the screen are the range of business organizations that are members of ASBC. These are all independent business organizations that have come on. They represent trade associations, women business groups, green sustainable business groups, Main Street, small business, economic development councils. So they come in many shapes and form. What has brought them together under the umbrella of the American Sustainable Business Council really is the idea that they're working towards a more just and sustainable economy. They call it different things, different frames they have, different constituencies that they're working with. But this idea of a new economy that's built around more just and sustainable principles is what drives them to their work together. So some of these are geographically based, which means that we have the ability to sort of partner with others in place. And some of them are sector-based, which means we have the ability to move certain sectors, at least in dialogue, in education, if not full outright engagement around the issues. Next slide. As a part of the work as well, is really our engagement of, individual businesses through the member organizations. We've now grown to represent over 165,000 businesses. What we've also done is try to reach out to some individual businesses to come on board, because we know that it's the brands of these individual businesses, whether it's an Eileen Fisher or a Patagonia or some of the other smaller mid-sized businesses that folks respond to, that they understand what it actually means, which is kind of different than when they hear the South Carolina Small Business Chamber of Commerce, one of our strong member organizations. But it's these brands that come on that have been willing to sort of raise their profile, right? And I think what's important is that over the last number of years, and certainly through our work at the council, it's become clear that the education and engagement we've been doing is to get businesses to understand that it's not enough to do the right thing within your business alone, creating good and healthy workplaces, or making your business more sustainable or more green product. What's really important as well is that you assume the responsibility to speak out on these issues. And so this is just a sampling of the businesses, some of the individual businesses that have come on as business supporters that are willing to sort of raise up their voice on a range of issues. The next slide. For those of you familiar with our work, right, it's really across the broad range of issues. That what we're trying to do, in short, though, is to create this new business voice, presence, and power at the White House, in Congress, and state legislatures, and certainly to raise up these business leaders and their voices in the media as well. So next, just moving quickly along here, the idea for us, though, is the good workplaces and the work around paid sick leave and minimum wage and healthy and safe workplaces. For us, that sort of fits within this larger frame of all the kinds of issues that sort of impact on our ability to get to a more just economy. So, for today, it was really to focus on business certifications, particularly within the context, of good workplaces, of good businesses within the frame of what they're doing in the workplace. But, what you'll hear from what you should know about BLAB and some of our other partners is that their certifications really are running through the gamut of the ways that businesses are supposed to be more responsible, more sustainable, and have larger frames. So we encourage you, and we'll send out some follow-up materials after. We really encourage you to go deeper, into these frames. And, and part of what you'll also get a little bit of insight into is the benefit corporation legislation that, we've been working side by side with BLAB at the forefront to pass across the country as state-based pieces of corporation law. Next slide. So the way that we've begun to really frame out the good workplaces is this idea, and we welcome dialogue with others on this, is really the idea of what's the business case that we have for moving on paid sick leave and other good workplace practices, right? So the idea around that, a lot of you are familiar with when you make this case from the worker perspective, but the idea here to make this case from the business perspective. So what we could do at the very least is to change the conversation through the business case, through case studies, through a set of business talking points that we could use and our business leaders could use, but also that we could change in working with you, that we can change the dialogue out there. So this runs from employee retention, greater commitment to the company, healthy employees, greater productivity, the idea of just, good jobs out there means more folks with money to spend in businesses as well, right? And so the idea of driving a middle class as being an incredibly important part of the argument that we make for these kinds of policies. And the idea that consumers are demanding more responsible companies since they have so many choices. And, of course, the idea that together we really need to be making these economic arguments alongside the other values-based arguments that need to be made. We don't want to supplant one versus the other, but the idea of in the toolbox making these economic arguments that offer the benefits of businesses is a really important part. Next is just as well the work of trying to think about the range of criteria. And what you'll hear, as you hear from Square Plate and from BLAB today, is some of the criteria, right? Some of the frames and the issues that they've included in good workplace and a good business and the like. But some of these overarching frames, the idea of safe and healthy conditions or livable wages or the access to fair benefits or democracy in the workplace, are all part of the frame that, we're trying to use in changing the conversation around this idea of that a good workplace is beneficial to business and to the economy. Okay, with that, next slide. I think we're going to move over to Hardeep now, if I'm not mistaken. No. So just here, it's one more. Yeah. So what you see up here, obviously, is the BLAB, the B certification that they have. But just to say that in this work, what clearly you probably have seen over time is an incredible proliferation of certifications out there. And if you think it's confusing, on the outside as an advocate or to consumers, it's extremely confusing as well to businesses out there, the choices that they have to make between the different frames and the like. It goes down from, certifications around specific chemicals, let alone to certifications for specific products, as well as to certifications around the business as a whole. And so we think that the two examples that we're sharing today with B-Lab and Square Plate give you a sense, though, of some of the more robust certifications that are in play. Square Plate with a specific sector, and B-Lab really running across sectors, and been at it for a while now. So I think you'll get a good sense, but it is an extremely robust frame out there, has become a very powerful tool. In fact, the one quick example I'll give is, I assume most of you are familiar with LEED certification around green buildings and the like. Well, recently introduced was a voluntary credit, through the LEED system around moving away from hazardous chemicals in buildings, right? One would think a relative no-brainer on this. It has incurred the wrath of the American Chemistry Council, incurred the wrath of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and they have been on a full onslaught attack of the U.S. Green Building Council and the LEED standards, to undermine it, to create another, alternative system, to do away with the U.S. government's, acknowledgement of LEED and use of LEED as one of the primary standards. So here's one that is built and had incredible impact across the building sector, for years now. Millions of folks, right? Most folks, knowing about the LEED standard, it has come under tremendous attack. So the idea that these certifications are powerful tools are actually proved out in point by the attacks that U.S. Green Building Council and LEED, are now under because of how powerful the tools can be. And even this was just a voluntary credit around safer driving towards safer chemicals. Next slide. Oh. Well,
I'm gonna pass the controls over to Hardeep. No, I'm gonna pass the controls to Hardeep real quick. Hang on just 1 second.
Thank you. Perfect. Yeah, thank you. Okay. All right. So while we wait for that to pass over, we're thrilled. B-Lab has been one of the founding members of the American Sustainable Business Council back when we started with 6 member organizations back in 2009. And Hardeep has been hard at work with them for quite some time, and we're thrilled to have him on today to sort of run through the work of B-Lab and Workplace and the criteria and so on. So with that, I'll turn it to Hardeep.
Thanks, David. Hello, everyone. This is Hardeep Savalia from B-Lab. I think that people might be familiar with our work with respect to B corporations. If you're not, I'll just sort of help define it. B Corps are effectively a new type of business. These are companies that are actively trying to address a social and environmental problem in addition to making money. I think you might be familiar with B Corps like, let's say, Patagonia or King Arthur Flour. I think that the difference between these companies and sort of regular corporations is that they view their role in business as being something totally different. They think that their companies are created largely to solve social problems. And so I explained that because originally when we started our work back in 2006 or 2007, one of the challenges at that time was, okay, well, if a company becomes a B Corp and has additional legal rights to consider these other factors, what do we do? How do we actually qualify companies who are doing this type of work? Are there any set of standards to help us define exactly what a B Corp is? And so at the time, there was no tool like that out there. And we created something originally called the B Impact Assessment. I'll actually pop online to show you what it is, just if you're not familiar with it. If you, by the way, if you're on the call and if you're interested in checking it out, I highly recommend you go to our website, bcorporation.net, and usually on the left-hand side there's a little sticky note that looks something like this that says take the B impact assessment. And then when you get in there, this is what the tool looks like. The tool asks a series of questions that are intended to measure if the company is exceptional at creating impact on its workers, community, or environment. And I'll give you a sense of what kinds of questions it might ask. So, for example, it tries to provide an impact performance score on topics like worker compensation, benefits, and training. And so in cases like this, one of the questions might be, does the company pay above a living wage for their lowest paid workers? And if so, how far above the living wage does the company's base rate pay? And then based upon the data that the company enters in, the company is offered effectively a grade on some of these topics. The idea is that not only is this useful for public, right, for consumers to be able to differentiate companies that are exceptional in impact, but I think that this is more a tool for the business owner. If you think in the history of the financial markets, let's say back in the 60s and 70s, it took accounting standards to define how exactly companies should report on their financial performance. And then over time, there were tools like QuickBooks, for example, that came along and made it really easy for companies to practice those principles. We think that the B impact assessment is doing exactly the same thing, but for impact performance. We hope that easy-to-use tools like this that allow a company to simply consider these types of criteria, evaluate themselves, and then obtain education around these topics will help move the needle pretty far. And just to illustrate this a little bit more, the idea is not just that the company will answer some of these types of questions, but that they're also able to access information about how to achieve this. So, for example, if the company doesn't know what a living wage is in their area, then there are calculators to help them calculate that specific number. If the company would like to learn how other employers approach this issue, they can click and learn about, for example, how Ben & Jerry's pays a living wage. They can also see benchmarking information to see how common these practices are amongst ordinary companies or B corporations, etc. So I hope you get the flavor that this is not just a standard. It is a tool. It is a tool for business owners and business managers to be able to consider all these types of factors. And then, honestly, the thing that I find most useful is that it provides companies a preliminary score or a grade. And what's interesting is that it also provides the average scores of several thousand other businesses that have completed the assessment. So the company can basically say, hey, our company scored relatively well on compensation benefits compared to other businesses. But you know what? We didn't do as well on topics such as environment, as an example, where we scored really low. And vice versa. You might get companies that are extremely high scoring on environment, but are not doing well on compensation. And the whole idea is that or this tool can provide resources to help a business improve that impact. So anyway, I hope that helps a little. I just want to illustrate how we think this plays a role. So far, there are about 800 B Corps across the country who are required to use this tool and who are required to meet a passing grade on the assessment. However, in addition to that, there are 15,000 other companies that have used this tool just voluntarily. A lot of these companies feel that they're interested in transforming their company into a better employer or a better environmental steward, and so they will log on just to test themselves. And we think that that alone is interesting. Quite honestly, if they become a B Corp or if they achieve a certain numerical score is really not the intent of this. What we hope to see is that there are companies of all types that can take even the smallest steps in improving their performance. I mentioned that because I think this is pretty important. We think at B-Lab that in a generation's time, every company in America will have to use some system of evaluating their social and environmental impact, just like every company today has to use some system to evaluate financial impact, right? And we think that a tool like this might help. I'll be the first one to say that we don't think that the standards are right. We don't think that the tool is perfect, but we needed to put something out there as a place to start. And we're only maybe 5 or 6 years into our work on this. And so I'm particularly interested in being on this call because there are lots of issues, topic areas, let's say, like paid sick leave or benefits, whatnot, that can be refined in this tool. Ideally, I'm hoping to engage this crowd that's on the call on 3 things. One is that we do want your specific feedback on how we can improve the standards. 2, I think we will love to work with some of the associations that are here and even use this evaluation on companies that you are talking to and see how they would fare and see if that alone changes their behavior. And I completely understand that honestly the 15,000 companies that have registered to use the assessment already are sold effectively on the idea that you ought to be a better employer. And I understand that especially some of the advocacy groups that are on this call are probably working on the total other end of the spectrum. Companies who need to be policed in some way or who need to be reminded that there are regulations in place for and that their practices aren't up to par. And I'll be honest that we at B-Lab haven't worked directly with that end of the business spectrum, but I think we'd be totally open to seeing if our tools can be of support in any of the work that you're doing. Third is, interestingly enough, that there is a way for us to work with business associations and governments to expand the use of this tool. For example, there are a number of municipalities today that are considering procurement preferences based on an evaluation like this. So, for example, we think it's pretty close to in the future where a municipality says, hey, in order for your company to receive a contract from us, you have to not only share your basic financials with us, but also let us know what kind of impact you're creating on your workers. And simply using a free tool like this is one of the criteria to simply receiving a contract from our government. We think that could be a really powerful way for governments to be able to improve the performance of their businesses, or at least in their networks, without regulation. So anyway, I just mentioned those things because those are all other tools in your chest. Do I think that they will replace the need for regulation? Probably not. But I think that they can be complementary to the work that everybody on this call is doing. That's all I have. I'll pause there.
Yeah. That's great, Hardeep. And like he said, so one is, go in, take your time, explore it. And, at the end of the presentation, Hardeep's contact information, will be up as well as the website information. And so, the idea here is to sort of build these relationships out. And so we'll also have a chunk of time for dialogue questions, after we finish with Square Plate. So, Jody, I turn it to you. We're thrilled to offer this today. Yes, go ahead.
So thank you very much, David. And to begin, this is Jody Levin-Epstein at the Center for Law and Social Policy CLASP, and I want to give a great big shout out to you, David, and your leadership at ASBC for bringing to us the whole certification movement and the possibility of marrying that movement of businesses that, as Hardeep was saying, want to tackle social problems and make a profit at the same time with our movement around paid leave. And so this is a great opportunity to build that out, and I thank you very much for your leadership. And Hardeep, I want to thank you for giving us all a good taste of what can be achieved through B Lab and B Core, and it is just the beginning, as you were saying, of figuring out how Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
You're good.
Now we can. We lost you for a moment there.
Yes,
now
I
I
don't
can
know
hear
what
you.
happened.
It looks like I had lost audio.
Oh, okay. Sorry
Okay.
about that. So
Okay.
in any event, I was suggesting that this is an opportunity for us to see and drill down into ways our two movements can work together, both from a paid leave interest at the local and state level for identifying individual businesses that might join forces in a legislative initiative, as well as what we might be able to do to augment the work of these certification efforts that are happening and that we're hearing about today. And I want to thank also our colleagues at the National Partnership and Family Values at Work for bringing so many of you onto this call. Over 60 people registered for this call. I'm now going to turn the tables over, if you say, to Rajiv Bhatia at Square Plate. Rajiv is someone who I met years ago and has an extraordinary reputation as a expert on public health and environmental regulation issues. He's representing the Square Plate Advisory Board, and he is the developer of this standard, and he can tell you about this new standard that's just beginning to hit the street, what its goals are, how it happens, how it plans to work, and how it intersects with the paid leave movement. And hopefully we will then, after Rajiv's presentation, be able to throw it open for what will no doubt be a lively Q&A. So Rajiv, take it away. Hello?
You just unmute yourself if you could, Rajiv.
Yes. Now, I've just followed Jody's instructions and I muted myself. So this is Rajiv. I'm based in Berkeley, California. And just a bit about myself. I've worked in public health and social policy and environmental regulation for about 15 years for the city of San Francisco. And this project is a project that has been initiated by the city of San Francisco in partnership with civic leaders and the restaurant industry in San Francisco. But today I'm just speaking as an advisory board member for the collaboration and the developer of the standards. My work had been in advocating for achieving some of the key environmental and social policy wins in San Francisco over the past 10 years, including paid sick leave. We were the first city to pass a paid sick leave ordinance, and higher minimum wage standards. But I have become very interested in using, I think, the voluntary standards approach to achieve some of these ends and as a complementary tool. The next slide, please. Can I have the next slide?
Can you see that?
Okay. So why Square Plate? So what I think this group probably doesn't need to say anything more about the sort of the very diverse and very powerful impacts on sustainability and social justice in the food industry. There are tremendous environmental impacts in our with our food system right now, from the consumption of oil to the destruction of the environment, the preservation of land for future growing, as well as social justice. Restaurant workers are among the poorest paid and most poorly benefited workers in the country. Yet there is growing sustainability leadership within the food industry. You have a number of responsible practitioners, and there's a growing consumer awareness and demand, particularly in a few cities, for sustainable practices, more focused on sustainable sourcing and environmental practices, perhaps quite a bit less awareness of the need to have higher standards on labor. But I think that the gap we thought we would try to fill was there was no single comprehensive third-party certified standard and label for sustainable and socially just or comprehensively sustainable restaurants in the United States. There were, in the landscape, there were product standards. Next slide, please. Yeah, there were product standards, and there were green business standards that focused on resource conservation. There were standards for fish and for pork and for the humane treatment of animals. There was a new sort of set of standards for nutrition, and some for sugar and some for carbohydrates, and so it all seemed very fragmented, and there seemed to be a need to try to bring it together. In 2009, we engineered an executive directive from the mayor that asked the health department to develop a comprehensive standard with the restaurant industry. From that point, we did about 2 years of research, slow research, talking to members of the food industry, talking to leaders in sustainable food, talking to people representing a variety of interests, from sort of health to labor, looking at the individual standards that these groups were using. And then we pulled together, at the beginning of 2012, we pulled together this kind of universe of fragmented standards into an integrated, comprehensive sustainability standard. And over the past, for the past year, we've been testing this standard and iteratively improving it with businesses in the city of San Francisco. Over the course of the year, we've had increasing collaboration with local restaurants, civic leaders, other groups and businesses in the sustainable food space. Next slide. So this is the standard has 4 sides. One represents community health, which is safety and nutrition and community benefits. One side is healthy workplaces, which is some of the issues we've been talking about: self-sufficiency wages, sick leave, health insurance, job safety, and professional development. There's sustainable sourcing, which is probably the most difficult aspect to document. Where the food is coming from, is it sustainably produced and transported? And finally, resource conservation. And resource conservation is essentially the lead for the physical, sort of the brick and mortar of the restaurant itself. There are 36 total points. There's 5 optional points. Like the lead approach, there are 3 levels of achievement. And I think importantly, and something that distinguishes this from many other of the standards in the food space, is all of the criteria are verifiable. And I really appreciated seeing the B impact assessment, because I found a lot of similarities in the approach. Next slide. So the certification process involves, I think this is fairly standard, contact, evaluation. It's an on-site evaluation. We'll review the documents with the business. We'll be doing visual observation in the business to verify certain standards. Once they're sort of certified at a particular level, we'll develop a profile with them that will be going on our website. And then there's the recognition and marketing, which I'll speak a little bit more to in a second. Next slide. So where are we right now? I think we are, I characterize us as pre-launch. We have 30 participating restaurants in San Francisco. We're developing a website. This is a kind of a glance at what our website's going to look like. We're developing a promotional video because we need fundraising. We're going to be probably going to individual donors as well as doing sort of a crowdfunding campaign. Right now we don't really have a lot of funds. There's been seed money provided by the city and county, but we need to sort of develop, we need to have independent funding for this. We found, I think, just speaking to funding, we found that it is actually very hard for a standard that is comprehensive to find a funding source, because the funding world is, I think, as equally fragmented as the sort of the fragmented standards we're trying to integrate. Our marketing plan, I think we have sort of multiple sides to that. We don't intend to have our own application or mobile app. We intend to intercept people on their way to restaurants, whether that's Yelp or OpenTable or Zagat. We plan to have, marketing events in local areas. And then finally, sort of our business plan, which we are still thinking through, to be honest. One of the things we haven't been doing and don't want to do is charge the businesses, at least for the first few years, for this certification. We've been doing this for free because we feel these businesses are really already going above and beyond. In developing the standard, and we also reached out to a number of interest organizations to make sure that our standards were aligned with their goals. So, for example, the Restaurant Opportunity Center had a number of policy goals and criteria in their own business standard for restaurants. We wanted to make sure our standards were aligned with those. The National Resources Defense Council had some very clear ideas about how to make sense of the probably 30 or 40 different product standards for sustainable foods, and which ones to value and which ones not to. So we did that kind of due diligence with the kind of what I would call the particular interest silos around food and around the nexus of food and sustainability. So next slide. I'll wait. Okay, so I think that while we're still pre-launch and going forward, we realize we want to be working as part of an ecosystem, and that ecosystem includes, food has a long chain from production to the time it gets to the restaurant, and there is a lot of standards and labels along the way. So that's one part of the ecosystem, the sort of the humanely grown meat and the sustainably procured fish and the local and the organic are all part of the ecosystem. There's a number of food system organizations, sustainable food suppliers. Today I just learned about a group called Provendor in Montreal, and they're going to be connecting farms directly to chefs. There are business consultants that are advancing, that are in the sustainable food space. So there's a lot of organizations, I think, to partner with in sort of moving this forward. Restaurant review and reservation sites, we've made some initial contacts, and sustainability interest groups like ROC and NRDC. Last slide is and then I'll wrap up. So our next steps are fundraising, capacity building, and partnerships. I've heard a lot. I think I'm very interested in following up on B-Lab, seeing how maybe we could learn from their technology or share technology. I'm interested in talking to people who might be interested in partnering with an application of the square plate standard in another city. And I think getting feedback on the standard itself. It's very hard to come up with a standard that works for local restaurants nationwide. We already know that the labor standards are probably going to have to be flexible or regionally defined, but things like that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rajiv. And Sean, if you could, or David, just fill folks in again about how to ask questions. But before you do that, I just want to let everybody know on the call that we all will be following up by sending you some materials and links. And ASBC in class put together a little brief on certifications. So you'll also have that as a tool to refresh and highlight some of the key points that were raised today. So Sean, David?
Hi there, this is Sean with ASBC. So again, if you're on the web platform via your computer, you should see a control panel. In the top left corner of the control panel, there should be a button that looks like a hand that's going to allow you to ask a question. And so if you would all like to start getting your questions into the queue, I did have one. I believe this one will probably be directed at B-Lab, but I'm going to go ahead and unmute Michelle McIntyre right now. Hang on just 1 second. Michelle, you should be good to go.
Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. My question for B-Lab is, I love everything that you guys are saying and getting the numbers, but my question is, how do you verify the numbers that the businesses are giving you, especially where wages are concerned? We have an issue, we're based here in DC, that Walmart told the community around here that they would pay $13 an hour. With the DC City Council looking to pass the living wage bill, it's just $12.50 an hour. They're now balking and saying they're going to leave the area. What do you guys do as far as verifying those numbers?
Hey, Michelle. This is Hardik. Nice to meet you. It's a good question. There are, for companies that choose to become a B corporation, or the companies that who take the assessment and feel like, hey, we do want to verify this to some degree, they do go through a documentation review, phone reviews with our staff, and even on-site reviews to make sure that their data is accurate. But I think that there are, again, thousands of other companies who will use the tool as a free service, just like for internal purposes, and they do not have to have that data verified. I mean, if they're just using it as like a free online tool, they're not required. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, it's kind of my question is just, does anybody ever end up talking to these workers? Because, you know, companies say one thing and then what they actually do, it can be completely different.
No, absolutely.
And this can go to both of you guys, Square Plate too.
Yeah. No, so Michelle, what happens is that when a company does, let's say they answer something about a wage, it takes several steps to actually verify that. In some cases, it's just simply looking for documentation from the company. In many cases, when we go on site, that does actually end up being resolved through a random employee interview where you get to talk to the employee and you get to ask them basically, hey, what is the wage that you're being paid, or what are the benefits that you're being paid? So it's exactly what you're mentioning.
Great, thanks.
Just from our perspective at Square Plate, so the evaluations are face-to-face. We will look at a sample for everybody of payroll records. We haven't had any issues in getting access to those. We don't keep them, but we look at them. And there is also an employee, there's sort of a fair labor code of conduct, which we developed with a number of our labor partners, that the employer agrees to distribute to all of the employees. We haven't launched yet, but I think we do want it. We will be doing annual complete sort of physicals, if you will. And we want to have a number, basically, to register a, lack of a better word, complaint, that we would then need to follow up. Because we realize it needs to be some degree of protection.
Great, thank you.
don't have any more questions. Rajiv, I was wondering if you might be able to help folks better understand and zero in on some of the potential for using the tool in other places besides San Francisco.
So we very much, I think, specifically developed the tool to be generalizable to multiple cities in the United States. We think that actually a harder challenge than the challenge of multi-city application is the challenge of a tool that works for the high price point restaurant and the low price point restaurant. I think that's a greater challenge than the challenge of getting it into Washington or New York or Portland or Galveston. I actually have colleagues in Galveston and Washington, D.C. who are interested in being the square plate certifiers for those cities already. And we have interest from Portland as well. So the specific things that need to change might be the the sort of what is the regionally specific living wage. But one of the ways we've mitigated the challenge for the difference in price point restaurants, and I think it is what it will make it applicable to other cities as well, is that, for example, on the labor standards, it isn't an all or none. It's so what is the percentage of non-tip? The question is, what is the percentage of non-tipped employees that are making a living wage? So you get a prorated share of points based on the answer to that question. So companies that are doing better with retention are typically going to score higher. Companies have the opportunity to move the needle. It's not all or none. I think the other aspect that makes it, and I think I'm very happy to send the standard itself to anybody who's interested. I didn't distribute it before the call. I think the standard will be self-explanatory. We've made it simple but powerful in a few different ways. So on the nutrition stuff, we didn't ask for micronutrient data as the some of like the federal standards or some of the nutrition standards ask for. All of the assessment really can be done by looking at the menu. What's the share of meals with fruits and vegetables? How many, do they offer small portion sizes? They were fairly straightforward and simple things to achieve.
We actually didn't have any more questions queued up, but I have shared the contact information here for everyone to see.
So
hey, David,
yeah.
Before we run off, can I ask a question this is Jody, for both Hardeep and Rajiv? There are folks on this call, some of whom are involved in very active and long-standing paid leave campaigns. There are some who are on this call from campaigns that are emerging. Could you, and both of your certifications are based on an enormous belief in and actual implementation of transparency. So I think we heard, particularly Hardeep, you speak to how the paid leave movement can help, market the assessment tool. And Rajiv, I assume you're thinking the same thing in terms of square plate and those kinds of things that we can hear as a companion kind of campaign. But in terms of actually identifying individual employers who might be receptive to joining forces on moving paid leave, how do we use your websites, or how are we able to use your website in the future, Rajiv, in trying to make that identification and trying to make that connection? Are there some tips we should hear from you? And Hardeep, if you could go first, and then Rajiv, if you could add on. Hardeep?
Hey, Jody.
Hey.
How you doing there?
Great.
I think that we can, this is honestly dependent on the industry that you are looking to support. So I can imagine that if you're, let's say, in Washington, D.C., and you just need any business that would be able to support, and they have the practices to support that, I think that would be relatively easy for us to do. We can sort of, we can look through our database and see which companies answered affirmatively to the questions related to sick leave, as an example, and then filter it down. Of course, if you find that, hey, it's a very specific industry that we're trying to target, let's say the construction industry or the hotel industry, then we can sort of boil it down from there. But I'll shoot you an email, Jody. I think we should connect offline anyway. But I'm hoping that you'll let us know what kind of company you need, and so that it makes your case stronger, and we can happy to connect you.
That's terrific. We'll coordinate with our partnering organizations and come up with an efficient list to pass along to you. That's terrific.
You bet.
And part of what, Jody, part of what we have set up, right, is that ASBC is sitting there with folks, working full time, focused on how to engage business leaders around these range of issues, and particularly paid sick leave, as you know. And so, it's both being able to. So when we see the request come in to us, then we will reach out to both B-Lab as well as the other organizations, as I was mentioning earlier. So there is that way to still tap. It also makes it sometimes a little bit easier on the groups like B-Lab at times, if we're helping to filter it and to help support them and sort of trying to identify the right sort of folks. So folks can be back in touch with us to help move that along.
So we'll just all coordinate offline and figure out a process that makes the most sense, and it's just terrific that it's potentially there. That's great.
Okay.
Did you want me to answer?
Rajiv?
Sure.
Yeah, Rajiv, yeah.
So I think there's a couple of points of sort of, I think, areas for sort of solidarity work. So clearly our industry is the restaurant industry, which is an important target industry for the sick leave movement, both because there's a low proportion of workers with sick leave, but also because sick leave is instrumental for safe food. We think that the cities where the sick leave movement has already sort of taken hold or is taking hold, our program and standard would probably be more welcome. And so making that connection and trying to find ways to sort of get Square Plate into cities that have sick leave or are working towards sick leave makes sense. On the other side, the data, when we have our website up, you will be able to see how well the restaurants are performing on the labor scope, and then if you request it, you'll get the full information of exactly what they're doing. From that, you'd be able to target probably the highest labor performers in our particular area, and also to see the relationship between labor performance and other performance. We certainly would be able to make the contacts and let you know which restaurants have a particular concern about workers. So I think that's a couple of ways, and there's probably others.
Right, and the other piece that this is David again. So the other piece that we offer up is, as you go through the standards and the certifications, if there are constructive ideas that you have about how to improve them. I assume Rajiv for Square Plate said that, but certainly in earlier conversations, B-Lab had said, we more than welcome, the input to improve these, because it is an ongoing learning process. So we'll welcome that. We'll send out the links to the website for you to be able to review these things, and happy to take back your comments as well. So if there are no further questions and comments, then I just want to thank class for doing this with us at the American Sustainable Business Council, and thank Rajiv from Square Plate, and thank Hardik and B-Lab for joining us today and for the incredible ongoing work that you do. So thank you all for joining us. Look for a follow-up email, or feel free to get back in touch. So with that, we'll just say good afternoon and thank you.